Hello. Now, I am not a fan of JavaScript at all. I like Ruby, I like Rails, but in the world when you build full stack Ruby on Rails applications where you don't use any framework for front-end JavaScript, as a full stack Ruby on Rails developer, you do need to be able to do some basic JavaScript. And Stimulus seems to be a compromise of just a tiny bit of JavaScript that you would need to have in a full stack Ruby on Rails monolith application. So you can create small JavaScript controllers and add them to your HTML. And the whole idea of Stimulus is that it doesn't have to work only with Ruby on Rails. So in theory, it can be used as a separate framework just with HTML. But in this episode, we are going to build a small, well, actually quite a big Stimulus controller for dropdowns. And here is a final result. So we'll be able to have a Stimulus controller that would open a dropdown on hover. So it would work like a tooltip, or when we click some kind of trigger. So you see the drop down is open, the trigger is colored. I click the trigger once again and it is not called anymore. And we would also have an opportunity to use different HTML for a closed state and an open state. So you see 3 kinds of drop downs, and also we would have the option to have a drop down open by default if we want. So let's get started. Now here I have a blank Rails application. Let's just open it. Yeah, here is a blank Rails application, and I'm going to start by adding a static HTML page. So I would say Rails generate controller home index. Okay, I would open this page. So go to /home/index, and here we have a static HTML page. And now we are going to generate a Stimulus controller. So as of the latest version of Stimulus, that is, let's see. Okay, we can see it in the gem file. So Stimulus Rails 1.0.4 in a Rails application, we can generate a Stimulus controller by typing Rails generate Stimulus and the name of the controller. So it would be something like dropdown. Okay, and you see it has generated a file in app/JavaScript controllers dropdown controller.js. So let's navigate there, go into app, JavaScript, controllers, dropdown controller. Here is this new dropdown controller, and we can initialize it on our HTML page. So how's that? Let's go to our HTML page in the views, home, index, and here we have a div, for example, and we can add the dropdown controller to a div. So we would say data controller. Let's make the font a bit bigger. Data controller equals dropdown. Okay. Will anything change? Let's start the server. Okay, so if we go to the HTML, we will see data controller equals dropdown, but well, it doesn't do any JavaScript actions at the moment. So let's just log something in the console. So let's say when the controller is initialized on an HTML page, we would log something in the console. We would say console.log hello. Okay, now let's go to the console, clean it up, and I will refresh, and you see in the console we have hello once again. Okay, so we have initialized this Stimulus controller. Looks fine. And now let's say we would want some kind of content to be hidden on a page if we have this dropdown controller. So we would have some kind of dropdown content that is hidden on the page. Let's say this will be the content, this line that is going to be hidden inside the dropdown. So let's maybe wrap it in another div. And well, we would need to add a target. So we would want to have a target that would be hidden. So I would go to the dropdown controller, and in Stimulus we can assign targets. So I would say static targets. It should be in plural, equals, and I would say the name of the target would be dropdown content, for example. So the content that should be hidden in a dropdown. Okay, and let's add this target to our HTML. So data dropdown target equals, let's see, dropdown content. Will this work? I'm not sure if the camel case is going to work, but let's see. So I would want this content to be hidden. So let's say when we connect the controller, this target is going to be hidden. So I would say this dot dropdown content target dot hidden equals true. Let's see if it works. I refresh, and well, yeah, it did work. So the content is hidden. Let's go to our HTML. Let's open it, and here we have this div. You see we have hidden. So it was assigned the hidden attribute, and the content is hidden in the HTML. Obviously, it is present in the HTML. So if we remove the hidden attribute, then it's going to be visible. Okay, so now we can make some kind of content hidden with our Stimulus controller. And now we would want to have a way to reveal this content that is hidden by default. So how are we going to do this? Let's add one more target. And when we click this target, we are going to remove the hidden state. So we would maybe add one more action that would be named open dropdown. So it's like an action in the controller, and we're going to take this target and we're going to make it not hidden. So hidden false. And we are going to, well, call this open dropdown somehow. So how are we going to call this open dropdown action? We can assign something to be a button. This home index thing can be a button, or we can create a new button. Let's say button open dropdown. And to this button, we're going to add a data action. So you see at the moment it does nothing. It's just HTML. But you see it's when we hover, it's kind of clickable like a button, but it's just HTML that doesn't go anywhere. So we would say data action. And in the data action, we're going to say that when we click it, we are going to open the dropdown. So click, and on click, we're going to go to the dropdown controller, and the action is going to be open dropdown. Let's see if it works. So I click, and you see the dropdown is opened. But when I click again, it doesn't close. So we want to have a way to also close the dropdown. Now, once again, here we have an action to open the dropdown. I click it, and it reveals the hidden content, but there is still no way to close the dropdown. Let's also add an action to close the dropdown. So we have an open dropdown action, and we'll also add a close dropdown action. Let's say close, and we will say hidden true. Okay, so let's say we have a button to open the dropdown, and we'll have a separate button to close the dropdown. So close, and here we'll say close. Now let's go back. So open, close, open, close. Looks fine. But what if, well, we don't want to have both buttons visible at the same time. We want to have open dropdown visible when the content is hidden, and close dropdown visible when the content is open. So we can also assign targets to these two divs. So I would add two more targets. One would be open button, and the other would be, for example, close button. And I would assign these targets here. I would say data drop-down target. So it is the name of the controller, and we say that it's going to be a target, close button, and data drop-down target, open button. Okay, so I've assigned these data targets. We can see it if we go to body, main. So you see we have data drop-down target open, data drop-down target close. And we would want to have something like, by default, we have this drop-down content target hidden by default. And by default, we want to have the open button also hidden, I think. Oh no, actually the close button hidden. So let's see. Now we'll have this close button target hidden by default. So you see, we have open dropdown. And when we click open dropdown, the content appears, but the close button isn't replaced with the open. Oh, the close button doesn't replace the open dropdown button. So we would like to add some additional actions here. So when we open the dropdown, we are going to reveal the close button. So make it not hidden. And when we close the dropdown, we're going to make the open dropdown button not hidden. Okay, let's see. So open dropdown, close dropdown. Okay, something's not working correctly yet. Let's see. So by default, the dropdown is hidden. The close button is hidden. Let's see. Yeah, that's true. Now, when we click open, we want to remove the open button. So also we'll make open button hidden true. Let's see. I click, the open button is hidden and the close button is not hidden. I click close and we should hide the close button. So we'll say close button hidden true. Okay. And let's click once again, open dropdown, close button. Okay. So basically, voila, it works. We have two different buttons, and one button is visible when the dropdown is open. The other button is visible when the dropdown is closed. So yeah, it works quite well. And you see, we can assign this data action not only to a button, but also to something like, well, to just a div. So let's say div click to open. Again, I will assign this data action. I will remove this. And here we have it. So I see I have this HTML, click to open. You see, when I hover, we don't have this button effect. And to give it a button effect, so we have a div, it's not a button. So I would say role equals button. So a div with the role button, you see, now I hover and it does kind of act like a button, though it is a div. So you see, we can have just some HTML and some stimulus. We're not using any Rails. And yeah, we have some basic drop-down functionality. But you see, in this case, we have separate, two separate actions with separate HTML to open and to close a dropdown. So what if we want to have just one same button, so that we just click and it opens or closes? Let's have not two buttons, let's have one button. So we'll be able to just toggle the dropdown, not replace one content with another. Let's add another action named toggle dropdown. We would say toggle dropdown. Okay. And let's say, how's it going to work? So we'll be able to call both open dropdown and close dropdown from here. So based on the dropdown content target, if it is hidden at the moment, we'll have the button to open dropdown. If it is closed at the moment, we'll have a button to, yeah, if it's closed, we'll have a button to open. If it's open, we'll have a button to closed. So we're going to write a basic JavaScript if statement. We'll say if this dot dropdown content target hidden equals true, we have to use double equals here. So then we're going to say this dot open dropdown. Else we will have this dot close dropdown. Okay, so basically, if the content is hidden, we'll have the option to open, and we're going to have the option to close also. And let's add this option to toggle this dropdown somewhere. So let's just add, let's say, another div. Let's say div role button data action click. We're going to have not open dropdown or close dropdown, but we'll have dropdown toggle dropdown. Okay. Let's see if it works. So now we have this toggle button, and you see each time when I click toggle, all this other HTML works. So yeah, it's kind of working. And here already we have two different options. Here we have just one line of HTML that opens and closes the dropdown. And here we have two separate lines of HTML that can basically have any kind of block of HTML you would like to open or to close. So yeah, looks quite fine to me. But let's go further. What if we don't want to have the option to open dropdown or to close the dropdown here? Let's say I will remove it, and let's see if it works. And yeah, it's kind of working. But you see, we get these errors in the console. Missing target element, close button. And if I click, I'll be getting all these errors. Why? Because it's trying to find this open button target and close button target, but we have removed these data dropdown targets from our HTML. So let's make these conditional. Let's say if they're present, we're going to try to do it. So I would say we're going to try to do it. I will say try to do this, and we're going to catch with an empty exception. Same here. We're going to try to find these targets and to do these actions if this is possible. So this way we are not going to have these problems in the console. Yeah, you can also log something in the console if you catch this spot. We are not going to do this. And let's see. Are we going to have... Okay, we still have an error, missing target element close button. Why is it so? Because in our connect, we also have this dropdown content target hidden and close button target. Yeah, actually, let's just say instead of this, we can just use close dropdown. So by default, the dropdown is always closed. I will say this dot close dropdown, and I'll remove all these lines. We don't need them anymore. And let's see if we have errors in the console now. No, no errors at the moment. So toggle works. And yeah, now our JS is a bit better, and we're not getting the console errors. But let's go further. We want to make it optionally So we want to have that dropdown optionally open by default. So how are we going to do this? We would like to specify an value here. Well, basically, we'll make it so that we'll be able to say in the HTML whether we want the dropdown to be opened by default or closed by default. So for this, we're going to use a stimulus value. We'll say static values equals, and this can be kind of a hash. So open boolean. Okay. And we will say that if we have an open value, so if this dot open value, if there is a value present, if it is kind of true, then we'll say this dot open dropdown. Else we are going to close the dropdown. Let's see. Okay, what do we have here? If we passed an open value that is true, we're going to have the dropdown open by default, else it's going to be closed by default. Let's return this just so that we don't lose this HTML, or let's actually add one more data controller here. In this data controller, we'll have click to open and click to close, and here we're going to have click to toggle. You see, you can have multiple controllers with the same, well, multiple stimulus controllers inside an HTML page, and you can even have them inside each other. Let's see. Here we have toggle, here we have click. You see, they work independently. Okay, so what we're doing, we want to have this dropdown open by default, for example. And to do this, we're going to say data dropdown open value, because the value's name is open, the controller's name is dropdown, and the value will be true. And if I refresh, you see, this is open by default. If I say false, this is closed by default. So voila, looks good. Now we can conditionally have it open or closed by default. And you can also add some Rails conditionals here, like user, something like current user.active. Something like this could also work in a Rails application. But anyway, you see, we didn't actually write any Rails or any Ruby code here, only a tiny bit of JS. And yeah, again, I am not a big fan of JS, but this is fine enough for me to comprehend. And some pure looking HTML. So I feel kind of satisfied with this kind of code. But let's go even further. What if we want to have, let's say, some CSS applied based on the state of the dropdown? So if it is opened, we're going to highlight the toggle button in one color. If it is closed, we're going to highlight the toggle button in another color, or not highlight it at all. So for this, we can use some classes. And for example, how can we do it? Let me think. So let's see. Here you see we have totally different HTML for the open state and for the closed state. So here we don't need to actually write any stimulus or any JS or whatever. Just we can add some class to this close button. We would say something like class, and what would we have in Tailwind for a background color. Yeah, we are using Tailwind here. Let's say background color would be sync 400. Okay. Oh my God. So let's refresh. Okay, I need to recompile with Tailwind. let's see, it would be Rails Tailwind CSS build. Yeah, I should have started foreman so that it builds each time, but it's fine. Let's go here, and here you see we have different HTML for this close dropdown, so looks fine. But here you see we have this toggle, and in the toggle we don't have this special CSS applied. We can't apply it because we're not changing. We're not replacing this content, this HTML content with some kind of other content. We're not hiding something and revealing something. So we would be able to add a data target and apply some CSS to the data target. I would say data dropdown target equals active or activated. Let's say active. Okay. And let's say when we open the dropdown, we will apply, we will try to find this target. So this active target. Oh, actually, we need to add this target here. So I would say the target's name would be active, and we would find this active target. And I would add some CSS. So a class, I would say class list dot add. And we can add just some Tailwind class. So, for example, this sync background. And let's see, I click toggle, and it didn't seem to work. Why didn't it work? Let's see, do we have any errors in the console? I guess not. So it was not applied. Interesting. Well, actually, I think it doesn't work because in this stimulus controller, we try to do all these actions in bulk, and we don't have this open button target and close button target. So it just cannot execute the whole thing. So we can actually try to move this active button target to this toggle button. So if we open the dropdown, we are going to add this active target. Let's see. Let's go back. I click toggle, and yeah, it kind of works, but it's not working really nice. I would like to also remove the class if we have closed dropdown class list dot remove. Let's see if it works nicely. Yeah. Okay. Let's try this in a different statement in open dropdown and in close dropdown. I would say try, then catch, and when we open the dropdown, we're going to try to add this clause. And in a separate statement, we are going to try to remove this clause when we close the dropdown. So class list dot remove. Let's see. Okay, so you see by default it is highlighted because we have it open. Now I click and the highlight is removed. So works like magic. And this way we can add the classes to our stimulus controllers. But it is not really cool to hard code these classes in a stimulus controller. What if we want to pass a class from our HTML? Well, this is also possible, and for this we can use stimulus classes. So I would say static classes, and would have a class that would be named opened. And we would replace this with an opened class. So I would say this class list add, and we would say this dot opened class. And here we are going to have something very similar. this active target class, remove this opened class. And now we need to pass this opened class in our HTML, because now we don't pass it at all, so nothing really happens. So let's try to pass this opened class. I would say data drop down opened class would be, and it would be again the string background. Now let's see if it works. And yeah, it works. So you see, now we are passing this inside our HTML instead of hard coding some CSS in a stimulus controller. And yeah, works really nice in my opinion. And one more option, what if we want to make it work as a tooltip when we just hover some kind of HTML? Well, this is already a small thing to do. I can just copy this controller once again. And I would say hover tooltip. Let me remove some stuff that we are not using. Okay, so this one should be opened or closed on hover. Let's make it closed by default. So we'll say false on this open value. Okay. And to make it open on hover, we are going to use a mouse enter action. So I would say click, instead of click, I will say mouse enter, drop down, toggle drop down. Let's see. So I enter with the mouse and it is toggled. But we should also make it work on mouse leave. So I will just copy this action, and without any commas or anything, I will say mouse leave. And let's see, hover and remove. And it works like a tooltip, looks great. And you see, it kind of moves all this HTML together with itself. So possibly you would want to add some additional CSS to the drop-down content. So I would say something like class fixed, for example, and I will refresh and you see, no, it didn't work. I would need to recompile Tailwind once again. Starting the server. And you see, it is, well, kind of above the content. You would want to possibly also give it some kind of background. So we would say like padding 4, rounded medium, and background red 700. Let's see if it works. I'll build Tailwind once again. Start the server. And here we go. So it's like a tooltip, and we have some nice HTML inside. Now, obviously, as it is a tooltip, if I move the mouse out, I cannot kind of press anything inside, but we have these other drop downs where we can press the content inside of them. And here you go. We have a few different options of doing tooltips, of doing toggles, of having separate HTML for an opened and closed state. And we can have the content opened or closed by default. And basically, we went through most of what Stimulus has to offer just in this video. We've gone through targets, through values, through classes, using the connect and using the controller actions. So again, you don't really need the Rails or Ruby to use StimulusJS, but you can use them with Rails, obviously. So I guess that's it. And yeah, thanks for being around. Слава Україні!